They laughed when a struggling veteran built a round wooden cabin in the middle of nowhere. No corners, no sharp edges, just curves. But why did his German shepherd refuse to leave that cabin's side, days before the storm arrived? Why did the sky turn an unnatural shade of green, while the wind went completely silent? And how did one strange cabin remain standing, when every other house in the valley was erased in less than a minute? Tonight, this isn't just a story about a storm. It's about instinct, survival, and a loyal dog who sensed danger long before any human did. Before we begin, I hope you're safe and warm wherever you're watching from. Tell us your country in the comments. And if stories like this matter to you, please subscribe so we can keep sharing them together. The Kansas plain lay open and restless under a low gray sky, the wind moving through dry grass with a steady whisper that never quite stopped. Clouds drifted slowly, heavy but undecided, and the air carried the smell of dust and distant rain that might come or might pass by. Mike Carter arrived in that wind with everything he owned packed into the back of a dented pickup truck. He was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered but worn down, the kind of man whose strength showed more in endurance than in display. His hair was dark brown, cut short out of habit rather than style, with gray already threading through it at the temples. A rough beard shadow clung to his jaw even when he shaved, softening the hard angles of his face but never fully hiding them. His eyes were steady, hazel and watchful, the eyes of someone who had learned to read danger in small changes most people ignored. The war had not left him with medals or savings. It had left him with a bad knee that ached in the cold, a sleep that came in fragments, and a silence inside him that crowded out small talk and easy laughter. Back home, he belonged to the working class now, hauling lumber, unloading freight, fixing fences for cash when someone needed an extra pair of hands. He did not complain. He had learned long ago that complaining wasted breath better saved for staying alive. The only constant beside him was Ace. Ace was a German shepherd, full-grown, large without being bulky, his coat a blend of tan and black, with a darker saddle marking along his back. His ears stood alert even when he rested, and his amber eyes missed very little. A faint scar ran along his left foreleg, half hidden by fur, a reminder of a blast that had come too close years earlier. Ace moved with purpose, never frantic, never careless. Even when he lay down, there was a sense that part of him remained on duty. They had been through dust storms, collapsing walls, nights when the sky shook with sound, and days when silence felt more dangerous than noise. When Mike climbed into the truck and turned the key that first morning in Kansas, Ace had already jumped into the passenger seat, sitting tall, facing forward, as if this were just another assignment. The land Mike bought sat at the edge of a small town whose name most people outside the county had never heard. It was cheap for a reason. The soil was stubborn, the wind relentless, and the nearest neighbors far enough away to watch without feeling responsible. The town itself was made of square houses, straight fences, and people who valued things they could explain quickly. On the first night, Mike did not have a house. He slept in the truck. The seat leaned back as far as it would go, a thin blanket pulled over his legs. Ace did not sleep. The dog sat upright between the open doors, watching the dark field, ears turning slightly at every shift of grass, every distant sound carried by the wind. Mike noticed it when he woke just before dawn, that familiar, mix of gratitude and unease settling in his chest. The next morning, he began. Mike measured the ground slowly, deliberately. He drove wooden stakes into the soil and connected them with string, not in straight lines, but in a wide, elongated oval. His movements were careful, almost reverent, as if the shape mattered in a way he could not afford to get wrong. Ace followed him step for step, occasionally stopping to sniff the air, then returning to Mike's side. A pickup slowed on the dirt road. A man leaned out the window, curiosity written across his face. "What are you building there?" Mike wiped his hands on his jeans. "A house." The man laughed, not cruelly, but with the easy amusement of someone confident the world would continue to make sense. "That is a funny-looking house." Mike nodded once. "It is." The man drove on. Word traveled faster than Mike expected. By the second day, people were stopping more often. Some watched from their cars. Others stood with hands on hips, heads tilted. A pair of teenagers rode by on bicycles, circled once, then twice, filming with their phones. Someone shouted that it looked like a giant egg. Another voice called it a fancy dog kennel. Mike kept working. He bent rebar and anchored it deep. He set the base low to the ground, reinforcing it where most people would not bother. Every decision came from memory, from lessons learned the hard way in places where corners failed and straight walls folded inward under pressure. Each curve he marked into the earth was a quiet refusal to repeat the past. Ace sensed the attention. When voices rose too close, the dog stepped forward, placing himself between Mike and whoever approached. He did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He simply stood, calm and unmovable, a silent reminder that some boundaries did not need explaining. Late that afternoon, a woman from town approached on foot. Her name was Sarah Whitman, and she carried herself with the careful posture of someone used to balancing politeness with caution. She was in her early 40s, tall and slender, with light brown hair pulled back into a loose knot at the base of her neck. Her skin was pale from spending most days indoors, and faint lines at the corners of her eyes suggested concern came to her more easily than laughter. She stopped a few steps away, giving Ace a respectful distance. "You new here," she said. Mike nodded. "Just moved in." She glanced at the stakes and string, then back at his face. "That is not how folks usually build around here." Mike met her eyes, not defensive, just honest. "I know." Sarah hesitated, then offered a small, uncertain smile. "Well, wind gets bad out here sometimes. Be careful." She turned and walked back toward town, glancing over her shoulder once as if she wanted to say more but did not know how. As the sun dipped lower, the wind picked up, carrying dust in low sheets across the ground. Ace stiffened, ears forward, body angled slightly toward the horizon. Mike felt it too. Not fear exactly, but a pressure behind his ribs, the sense of something unseen shifting its weight. That night, they ate from a small camp stove. Mike shared his food with Ace, tearing it carefully, making sure the dog ate first. When darkness settled, Ace resumed his watch. Mike lay back in the truck, staring at the sky, listening to the wind slide over the open land. He thought about corners. He thought about roofs tearing free. He thought about the way silence could scream louder than sound. In the days that followed, the laughter grew louder. A man named Hank Miller stopped by one morning. Hank was in his late 50s, thick through the middle, with a red face and a gray mustache that drooped over a mouth accustomed to scowling. He had lived in the area his entire life, and wore that fact like armor. "You building a house or hiding from aliens?" Hank asked, eyes narrowing as he studied the curved outline. Mike did not look up from his work. A house. Hank snorted. "Houses got corners. Always have." Ace stepped closer to Mike, muscles tightening just enough to be noticeable. Mike finally straightened, meeting Hank's gaze. "Corners break." Hank laughed and shook his head. "You soldiers come back with strange ideas, maybe," Mike said quietly. Hank left, still laughing, but his eyes had lingered on Ace longer than on the foundation. By the end of the week, Mike's hands were blistered and his knee throbbed constantly. He took work in town when he could, unloading grain, repairing machinery, earning just enough to buy supplies. He slept little. When he did, dreams came heavy and disordered, fragments of collapsing structures and voices calling his name. Ace remained steady. On the 7th morning, Mike drove the last stake into place and stepped back. The oval foundation sat low and wide against the earth, a shape that looked wrong to those expecting straight lines, but right to him in a way that eased something tight in his chest. Oh, gust of wind passed over the ground, sliding around the curve instead of catching. Ace watched it, then looked up at Mike, ears twitching. Mike rested a hand on the dog's head. "We are doing this right, buddy." Ace did not wag his tail. He did not relax. He simply stayed close, eyes on the horizon, as if he knew the foundation was not just the beginning of a home, but the first line in a defense that would soon be tested. The days after the foundation was set did not bring relief. They brought routine, and routine was heavier than pain. Mike Carter woke before sunrise each morning, long before the wind warmed or the town stirred. His knee protested the moment he swung his legs out of the truck, a deep ache that traveled up his thigh and settled into his lower back. He paused every time, one hand braced against the doorframe, breathing through it until the pain dulled into something usable. Ace was always already awake, standing on the ground beside the truck, scanning the empty field as if the night had left unfinished business behind. Mike worked until his hands split. The skin across his palms cracked and bled despite the tape he wrapped around them. He chose good lumber, heavier than most would bother with, boards that cost more but felt right when he lifted them. Each bolt he bought was rated stronger than necessary. Each anchor he drove into the earth went deeper than the instructions required. He measured twice, sometimes 3 times, not out of fear of mistakes, but because he trusted nothing that rushed. He did not go into town unless he had to. When he did, he kept his head down and his words few. Men gathered at the bar in the evenings, laughing loud enough to spill into the street. Mike passed by them on his way to the hardware store, his clothes dusty, his shoulders tight. He never joined. He had learned long ago that noise did not mean connection. Ace stayed close, walking at his left knee, matching his pace, occasionally bumping Mike's leg with his shoulder in a quiet check-in that needed no reply. The laughter found him anyway. By the 3rd week, nearly everyone in town knew about the man building a house without corners. Teenagers rode their bikes past the site every afternoon, slowing just enough to shout jokes. One boy with freckles and a sharp chin filmed Mike openly, narrating in a loud, mocking voice about the strange bunker in the field. Mike ignored them, eyes on his work, jaw clenched. Ace did not ignore them. The dog stepped forward each time, body squared, tail low but steady, eyes locked onto the boys with a calm intensity that drained the humor from their voices. They never crossed the string line marking the foundation. They laughed, but they kept their distance. Hank Miller appeared more often. He seemed to enjoy timing his visits for when Mike was carrying something heavy or kneeling in the dirt. Hank always had something to say, usually loud enough to carry. "Looks like you're building yourself a coffin sideways," he called one morning, hands hooked into his belt loops. "Wind'll get under that thing and roll it clean over." Mike set the beam down slowly, easing pressure off his knee. He looked at Hank, his expression flat. "Wind does not roll what it cannot grab." Hank scoffed. "You always talk like that, like you know something the rest of us don't," Mike shrugged. "Maybe I do." Hank laughed again, but there was less amusement in it this time. He glanced at Ace, then turned and walked away. Sarah Whitman stopped by once more, bringing a paper bag with 2 bottles of water and a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. She stood awkwardly at the edge of the site, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. Her light brown hair was pulled back again, loose strands framing her face, and her skin looked pale in the sun, almost translucent. She wore a simple cardigan over a faded shirt, sleeves rolled up as if she had debated helping but decided against it. "You look like you could use this," she said, holding out the bag. Mike hesitated, then accepted it with a nod. "Thank you." She watched him eat in silence, eyes following his movements, the way he favored his right leg when he stood. "You hurt yourself over there," she said, nodding toward the knee. "A long time ago," Mike replied. She did not push. She glanced at the foundation, the curved outline taking clearer shape now. "People talk," she said quietly. "They always do." Mike met her gaze. "I know." Sarah studied Ace, who sat at Mike's side, alert but relaxed, tongue just visible between his teeth. "He seems like a good dog." Mike allowed himself a small smile. "He is." She nodded, then turned to leave, pausing only once. "Wind does get strange out here," she said over her shoulder. "Stranger than people think." When she was gone, Mike stood for a long moment, watching the grass bend and straighten in uneven waves. Ace's ears turned, tracking something far off, something Mike could not hear. Money ran out faster than Mike expected. Lumber cost more every week, and the odd jobs he found during the day barely covered food and gas. When the owner of a local warehouse offered night work loading freight, Mike took it without hesitation. The hours were brutal. He worked from dusk until nearly dawn under harsh lights, lifting crates until his arms shook and his knee burned like fire. The foreman, a thin man named Carl Jensen, with a narrow face and tired eyes, paid him less than promised, claiming shortages and accounting errors. Mike said nothing. He needed the work. When he finished his shift, he drove straight back to the field, washed his hands in cold water from a jug, and went back to building. Sleep became something he borrowed in short, uneven stretches. Sometimes he woke with his heart racing, convinced he heard metal tearing or walls collapsing. Each time Ace was there, sitting close, grounding him with steady presence. One afternoon, as Mike was setting a support brace, his knee buckled. Pain shot up his leg, sharp and sudden, and he went down hard, breath knocked from his chest. Ace was at his side instantly, nudging his shoulder, whining softly. Mike lay still for a moment, staring at the sky, sweat stinging his eyes. He forced himself upright, leaning heavily on a post until the pain eased. From the road, laughter drifted toward him. Someone had seen him fall. Someone had enjoyed it. That night, he sat on the tailgate of the truck, knee wrapped in an old brace, watching the horizon darken. Ace lay at his feet, head resting on Mike's boot, eyes open. "You could have stayed inside," Mike murmured. The dog's ears flicked. Ace shifted closer instead. The wind picked up again, a long, steady breath across the land. It carried no rain, no obvious threat. But Mike felt the same pressure in his chest he had learned to respect years ago. Not fear. Awareness. He closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him, remembering other nights, other skies that had felt wrong long before disaster arrived. Tomorrow would hurt more. The town would laugh again. The money would still be short. None of that mattered. The foundation was holding. The curves were right. And Ace, pressed warm and solid against his leg, seemed to agree. The hail came without warning, sharp and sudden, rattling against the truck and the unfinished structure like handfuls of thrown gravel. The sky had darkened early that evening, clouds pressing low and heavy, and the wind changed direction twice in less than an hour. Mike Carter sat inside the cab of his pickup, shoulders slumped from another long shift at the warehouse, listening to the ice strike metal and wood. Ace lay on the passenger side floor, head up, ears angled toward the sound, eyes alert but calm. Hail did not bother him. Sudden changes did. Mike reached behind the seat and pulled forward the steel box he had not opened in years. It was dented along one edge, the latch scratched and dulled, a faint red-brown stain still visible where someone else's blood had once dried. He set it on his lap and rested his hands on it for a moment, fingers stiff, as if testing whether he was ready. The hail drummed harder. Ace shifted closer, pressing his shoulder lightly against Mike's leg. The box had come home with him from the war, heavier than it looked, heavier than the papers inside should have made it. He had told himself he was keeping it for reference, for memory, for reasons that felt practical at the time. The truth was simpler. He had been afraid to open it. The latch clicked. The sound was small but final. Inside lay a bundle of folded papers, edges soft and worn, held together by a strip of faded cloth. The smell rose first. Old dust, metal, and beneath it, something warmer. Paper that had lived through heat and sand and smoke. Mike unfolded the top sheet carefully, smoothing it across his knee. Lines appeared, drawn in dark pencil, firm and precise. Arrows curved around shapes. Notes crowded the margins, written in a compact hand that wasted no space. Ace lifted his head and sniffed. He leaned forward and touched his nose to the paper once. Then again, slow and deliberate. His ears twitched, and for a moment, Mike could almost see the desert reflected in the dog's eyes. The drawings belonged to Elias Moreno. Elias had been a civilian engineer, early 50s, lean and wiry, with deep lines carved into his face by sun and constant focus. His hair had been black once, now streaked heavily with gray, always tucked beneath a battered cap. He spoke softly, with an accent that hinted at places farther south, and when he talked about structures, his eyes lit with a quiet intensity that had nothing to do with war. He had been assigned to advise on rebuilding efforts near a battered settlement that kept getting flattened by storms and blasts alike. Mike had met him after a long night when half a temporary shelter had collapsed under wind pressure and faulty angles. 2 soldiers had been hurt. 1 had not gotten back up. Elias had knelt in the dirt afterward, sketching with a broken pencil on the back of a ration box, muttering to himself about corners and force and stupidity. Corners fail, he had said then, looking up at Mike with tired certainty. They give pressure a place to collect. Curves let it pass. Mike traced one of the drawn arcs now, his thumb following the line. The page showed a simple structure, oval in shape, low to the ground, arrows indicating wind flow sliding around it like water around stone. Another page showed comparative diagrams. Square walls darkened at the corners, pressure points marked heavily. Curved walls clean, lines flowing away. He had watched roofs tear free overseas. He had heard the sound of walls giving way, the sharp crack before collapse. He had seen what happened when force found a weak place and decided to stay. That was why the foundation mattered. That was why every curve was deliberate. The hail slowed, then stopped. In its place came a quiet that made Mike's chest tighten. Not silence exactly. Something thicker. Waiting. Ace's body tensed. His head lifted, ears locking forward. A low sound rolled from his chest. Not a bark, not a growl, but something in between. A warning shaped by memory. He rose to his feet and moved to the open door, staring out into the dark field beyond the foundation. Mike followed his gaze. The hail had flattened the grass in uneven patches, the ground shining wet under the dim glow of the truck's interior light. Far out, beyond where the field dipped, something moved. Or maybe it did not. The darkness played tricks, especially when a man was tired. Ace did not blink. Mike folded the papers carefully and set them back in the box, though he did not latch it shut. He stepped out of the truck, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The air felt wrong, cooler than it should have been, heavy in a way that pressed against his skin. He breathed in slowly, testing it the way he had learned to do when radios went quiet and instincts had to speak first. The wind brushed past him, not strong, but steady. It did not tug or snap. It slid. Ace took a step forward, then stopped, waiting for Mike. His tail was low, his muscles tight, his focus fixed on the open land. "Easy," Mike murmured, though he was not sure who he was calming. They stood there together for several long seconds before Ace relaxed just enough to sit. The tension did not leave him completely. It never did. But the immediate alarm faded, replaced by watchfulness. Mike went back to work the next morning with renewed purpose. He reinforced the lower supports, adjusting angles, tightening bolts. He altered one section of the frame slightly, based on a note he had reread twice from Elias's sketches. Wind from unexpected directions. Build for the wrong storm. His knee screamed by midday. He ignored it. Pain was familiar. Failure was not an option. Hank Miller drove by twice that day, slowing each time. The second time, he stopped. He leaned against his truck, arms crossed, chewing on something Mike did not bother to identify. "You know people are saying you're nuts," Hank called out. Mike kept working, they say. "That house of yours won't hold up to a real blow." Mike tightened a bolt, stood, and wiped sweat from his brow. "We will see." Hank snorted. "When it goes, don't say we didn't warn you." Ace stepped into view then, positioning himself between Mike and the road, gaze steady and unblinking. Hank hesitated, then waved a dismissive hand and drove off. Later that afternoon, Sarah Whitman returned. She brought no food this time, only herself, standing a little closer than before. Her face looked paler than usual, faint shadows beneath her eyes. "You feel that, don't you?" she said quietly, nodding toward the sky. Mike glanced up. Clouds had begun to stack in odd layers, long and flat, pressing together like pages of a book. "I do," he replied. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. "Weather radio's been acting strange, cutting in and out. Forecast keeps changing." She looked at the curved framework rising from the ground. "That thing of yours. It is meant for storms, isn't it?" Mike did not deny it. She nodded slowly, then stepped back, as if some boundary had been crossed. "Be careful," she said again, softer this time. That night, Mike slept sitting up against a support beam, wrapped in a blanket, the steel box open beside him. Ace lay across his feet, head resting against Mike's shin, eyes half closed but never fully asleep. Outside, the wind moved across the land in long, sliding breaths, tracing the curve of the foundation again and again, as if testing it. Mike watched the shadows shift and thought of Elias Moreno, kneeling in the dirt halfway across the world, drawing lines that refused to leave him. He thought of roofs collapsing and men not getting back up. He thought of promises made in silence. He rested his hand on Ace's back, feeling the steady rise and fall beneath his palm. Whatever was coming, it was not finished yet. And this time, he was not building blind. The morning began like the others, with wind brushing the field in uneven strokes and Mike Carter moving on stubborn muscle memory rather than rest. His knee ached from the first step down from the truck, a dull fire that never fully faded now, but he ignored it the way he ignored hunger and exhaustion. The roof frame had to go up today. He told himself that once it was in place, the structure would finally look like a shelter instead of an idea people laughed at. Ace sensed the strain before Mike admitted it to himself. The German Shepherd stayed closer than usual, shadowing Mike's movements with quiet precision. His ears twitched constantly, tracking sounds both near and far, and his tail stayed low, barely moving. He watched the ropes, the beams, the angles, not with curiosity, but with the same seriousness he had once watched doorways and rooftops in other places, other years. Mike hauled the long wooden beam into position, using a makeshift pulley rig he had assembled from borrowed rope and a salvaged wheel. His hands shook as he tied the line, fingers stiff and cracked despite the tape wrapped around them. The beam was heavier than the others, thicker, chosen deliberately for the main roof support. He pulled on the rope, muscles burning, breath coming in short bursts. The beam rose inch by inch. Ace sat a few feet back, eyes locked on the moving wood. Mike stepped forward to guide it into place, adjusting his footing on the uneven ground. His knee buckled slightly, just enough to throw off his balance. At the same moment, the rope slipped. The sound was sharp, sudden, a violent snap that echoed across the field. The beam dropped. For a fraction of a second, Mike froze, his body lagging behind his mind. Exhaustion dulled the edge that usually kept him alive. He saw the shadow of the beam falling straight toward where he stood. He did not have time to move. Ace did. The dog launched himself forward with a force that felt impossible, slamming into Mike's side and driving him hard into the dirt. Mike hit the ground shoulder first, air exploding from his lungs in a rough gasp. The beam crashed down exactly where he had been standing, splintering against the earth with a violent crack. Wood fragments flew outward. One of them struck Ace. Mike heard the sound before he saw it, a sharp yelp cut short, followed by a low, pained whine. He rolled onto his side, panic flooding through the fog in his head. Ace staggered back, his front leg dragging, blood already darkening the fur near his paw. Ace. Mike crawled to him on hands and knees, ignoring the screaming in his knee, his chest tight with something far worse than pain. He wrapped his arms around the dog's neck, hands shaking as he searched for the wound. A jagged piece of wood had torn through the skin near the pad. Not deep enough to break bone, but deep enough to hurt badly. Blood seeped steadily, bright against the tan fur. "I am sorry," Mike whispered, the words breaking as they left him. "I am so sorry." Ace did not pull away. He licked Mike's chin once, then tried to stand straighter, even as his injured leg trembled beneath him. His eyes stayed on Mike's face, steady and calm, as if the pain mattered less than the fact that Mike was still breathing. Mike carried him to the truck, cradling the dog's weight against his chest, like something fragile and irreplaceable. He cleaned the wound with shaking hands, tearing open his last roll of gauze, using bottled water meant for drinking. He worked slowly, carefully, the way he had learned to treat injuries when panic only made things worse. Ace endured it without snapping or struggling, breathing hard but trusting completely. By the time Mike finished wrapping the leg, his hands were red and his throat burned from holding back something close to tears. He rested his forehead against Ace's, eyes closed, grounding himself in the familiar warmth and scent of the dog. "You saved me," he said quietly, again. A car slowed on the road. Someone leaned out, looked at the fallen beam, at Mike kneeling in the dirt with his injured dog, and laughed. The sound carried easily across the open land, light and careless. "Told you that weird house was trouble," a voice called. "Even hurting your dog now." Mike did not look up. He could not trust himself to speak. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Mike dismantled the pulley rig, moved the fallen beam aside, and secured the area enough to keep it from becoming more dangerous. He stopped work early, something he rarely allowed himself to do. He sat beside Ace under the open sky, watching the clouds drift, his hand resting protectively on the dog's back. As evening approached, Sarah Whitman appeared again, walking quickly from the direction of town. She slowed when she saw Ace's bandaged leg, her face tightening with concern. "What happened?" she asked softly. Mike explained in few words. His voice was flat, controlled, but the guilt sat, heavy behind it. Sarah knelt carefully a short distance away, her movements cautious, respectful. Up close, her features were gentler than Mike had noticed before. Light freckles across her nose, eyes a soft gray that reflected worry easily. She reached out but stopped short of touching Ace, letting him decide. "He is brave," she said after a moment. Mike swallowed. He should not have been hurt. Sarah shook her head slightly. He did what dogs like him do. He protected his person. She looked up at Mike, studying the lines in his face, the tension he carried even while sitting still. That kind of loyalty is not an accident. She stayed a few minutes longer, then left, glancing back once with an expression that suggested she understood more than she said. Night came quickly. The temperature dropped, and the wind picked up again, sliding across the field in long, steady currents. Mike built a small fire in a metal ring, keeping it low and controlled. He fed Ace first, tearing the food into small pieces, watching closely to make sure the dog ate. Ace did, slowly, carefully, then lay down with a tired sigh. Mike expected him to stay there, He expected rest, pain, exhaustion to finally claim the dog. Ace rose instead, limping slightly, favoring the injured leg. He began to walk the perimeter of the foundation. He moved with deliberate care, stopping at each stake, each anchor point, nose close to the ground, ears turning toward the dark field beyond. He checked the lines, the shadows, the spaces where something might approach. Mike watched, chest tight, a mix of pride and sorrow washing over him. He stood and followed at a distance, ready to stop Ace if the pain became too much. The dog did not falter. He completed the circuit once, then again, slower the second time. Only when he finished did he return to Mike's side and lie down, finally allowing himself to rest. The wind brushed over the curved foundation, slipping along its shape, whispering without force. Mike sat beside Ace, one hand resting gently on the dog's shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. He thought of how close he had come to being crushed beneath that beam. He thought of how easily the story could have ended there, unfinished and meaningless. Instead, Ace had chosen him again. Mike stared out into the darkness, where the field met the sky, and felt a quiet certainty settle into his bones. Whatever he was building here was more than a shelter. It was a promise. And Ace, injured but unbroken, understood that better than anyone. The day after the accident dawned with a sky that looked washed thin, pale blue stretched tight over the Kansas plain like fabric pulled too far. The wind was there, as always, but it moved differently now. It did not gust or snap. It slid, steady and smooth, brushing the curved frame of the unfinished house as if tracing it. Mike Carter noticed it the moment he stepped out of the truck. Ace noticed it sooner. The German Shepherd limped slightly as he followed Mike, favoring his bandaged leg, but his posture was alert, ears high, eyes sharp. Injury had slowed his body, but not his focus. He stopped often, head lifting, nose testing the air. Mike worked quietly, reinforcing joints, tightening brackets, building the curved doorway that would become the heart of the structure. Every movement sent pain up his knee and into his lower back, but he welcomed it. Pain meant he was still moving. By mid-morning, a sedan unfamiliar to the town turned off the main road and rolled slowly toward the edge of Mike's land. It was clean, but not new, dusted with travel, the kind of car driven by someone who spent more time on highways than on dirt tracks. It stopped well short of the foundation. The engine cut. A woman stepped out. She was in her mid-50s, medium height, with a build that suggested long hours sitting and longer hours standing. Her hair was steel gray, cut just above the shoulders and pulled back neatly, not for style but for function. Her face was lined in a way that spoke of concentration rather than age, eyes sharp behind thin-framed glasses. She wore practical clothes, dark slacks, sturdy boots, and a windbreaker bearing a small, stitched emblem near the chest. Her movements were precise, economical. Ace placed himself half a step in front of Mike without being told. The woman noticed. She stopped where she was, hands visible, posture calm. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was steady, professional, carrying no hint of mockery or curiosity. "I am Laura Bennett, National Weather Service." Mike wiped his hands on his jeans. "What brings you out here?" Laura glanced toward the sky, then back to the curved frame rising from the ground. "I have been tracking pressure anomalies across this region, upper-level winds behaving strangely for this time of year." She took a step closer, slow enough not to startle the dog. I heard about your construction from a few people in town. Ace did not move, but his ears twitched when she spoke. Laura continued. They said you were building something without corners. Mike nodded once. May I take a look? Mike hesitated, then gestured toward the steel box sitting open on a crate near the foundation. Laura approached carefully, kneeling beside it. She pulled on a pair of thin gloves before touching the papers inside. Her eyes moved quickly as she scanned the diagrams, her brow furrowing deeper with each page. These are not amateur sketches, she said after a moment. Whoever drew these understood wind, dynamics very well. A man I knew overseas, Mike replied. Laura looked up at him, studying his face more closely now. The set of his jaw, the way he stood despite the pain he clearly carried. That explains a few things. She stood and turned slowly, surveying the land, the horizon, the odd stacking of clouds far in the distance. Pressure has been dropping at irregular intervals, she said. Not enough to trigger alarms yet. Enough to concern me. Ace reacted the instant she said the word dropping. His head snapped toward the horizon. His body stiffened, every muscle alert. A low sound rolled from his chest. Not loud, but unmistakable. Laura noticed immediately. That dog of yours, she said quietly. He feels it, does not he? Mike swallowed. He has been acting strange for days. Laura nodded slowly. Animals sense shifts before instruments sometimes, especially ones trained to watch and react. She paused, choosing her words carefully. There is a system forming farther west, a supercell. It is early, too early. But if it organizes the way the data suggests, it could produce severe weather. Possibly a tornado. The word landed heavy. Mike felt a familiar chill run through him. Not fear, but recognition. He looked down at Ace, whose eyes never left the sky. When? Mike asked. Laura exhaled. Hard to say. Days, maybe less. The atmosphere is unstable in a way I do not like. There is talk of a lull, a quiet period before everything changes. At the phrase quiet period, Ace let out a sharp bark, sudden and loud enough to make Laura flinch slightly. He took 2 limping steps forward, staring at the distant clouds that now stacked in long, unnatural layers, flat and pressed together like pages in a closed book. That, Laura said softly, that is exactly what I mean. Mike felt something inside him lock into place. All the warnings Ace had given, the odd stillness, the way the wind slid instead of pulled. It had not been imagination. It had been preparation. Thank you for coming, Mike said. Laura nodded. Finish what you are building, she said without hesitation. Make it as strong as you can, and when the air goes quiet, do not ignore it. She met his eyes, her expression grave. Most people do. She stepped back toward her car, then paused. You may want to tell your neighbors. Mike looked toward town, picturing Hank's laugh, the teenagers filming, the careless confidence built on years of storms that never quite arrived. They will not listen, he said. Laura's mouth tightened. They rarely do. She glanced at Ace once more. At least you have him. She drove away, dust rising briefly behind her before settling back into the earth. Mike stood in silence for a long moment after she left. Ace remained at his side, body tense, ears high. The clouds on the horizon shifted slightly, layers thickening, flattening, organizing themselves with slow intent. We are running out of time, Mike murmured. He went back to work with a focus that bordered on desperation. He set the curved door frame, shaping it carefully, reinforcing the hinges, ensuring the fit was precise. He doubled the fasteners on the roof supports, adding steel straps where wood alone might fail. His hands split again, blood smearing across the grain, but he did not stop. He wrapped them quickly and kept going. By afternoon, Sarah Whitman approached once more, her pace hurried, her expression tight. "You see it too," she said without preamble. "The sky. It feels wrong." Mike nodded. He told her only what mattered. Someone from the weather service came. Things might get bad. Sarah's face drained of color. Should people leave? Mike hesitated. "I do not know yet, but they should be ready." She glanced at Ace, who stood between them, eyes on the horizon. "That dog has not relaxed once," she said. "He will not," Mike replied. "Not until this passes." As evening fell, the wind shifted again, then faded almost completely. The air grew thick, heavy, pressing against Mike's ears. The field fell unnaturally still. No insects, no birds. Even the grass seemed to hold its breath. Ace whined softly, pacing despite the pain in his leg, stopping at the doorway, staring outward. Mike finished the last reinforcement just as the sun dipped low, staining the clouds with a dull, sickly tint he did not like. He stepped back, chest heaving, and rested his hand on the curved door. The structure stood solid, quiet, waiting. Ace came to his side and leaned against his leg, a silent question and a warning all at once. "Soon," Mike said under his breath. The quiet deepened, stretching thin. Somewhere beyond the horizon, something was gathering strength. And this time, Mike knew it was real. The afternoon light thinned without warning, as if someone had dimmed the world by degrees. The wind, which had whispered across the Kansas fields all morning, vanished in a single breath. Not faded, not slowed. Gone. The stillness pressed against Mike Carter's ears until he became aware of his own heartbeat. Heavy and uneven, echoing in his chest, like a drum played too close. The sky shifted next. Blue drained away, replaced by a pale green stained with yellow, the kind of color that did not belong to any season he knew. It washed over the land, flattening the horizon, making the fields look brittle, glassed over, unreal. Ace felt it first. The German shepherd's body began to tremble, not in panic, but in effort. His injured leg shook under him, yet he planted himself harder, claws digging into the dirt. His ears pinned back, then snapped forward again, tracking something Mike could not yet see. He let out a short, sharp bark and grabbed the sleeve of Mike's jacket, tugging. Once, urgent. Inside. Now. Mike did not argue. He dropped the wrench still clutched in his hand and let Ace pull him toward the curved doorway. The house stood finished just enough to matter, the oval walls sealed, the rounded door hanging true within its frame. Mike felt a rush of gratitude and fear twist together in his chest as he crossed the threshold. Beyond the field, down the gravel road, the town gathered. Cars idled, doors stood open. People pointed their phones toward the sky, voices raised in disbelief and nervous laughter. Hank Miller stood near the edge of his property, thick arms crossed over his chest, baseball cap pulled low. He was a stocky man in his late 50s, with a heavy jaw and permanent stubble, the kind of face shaped by years of stubborn certainty. He laughed loudly, a sound that carried even through the heavy air. "Looks like your wind finally scared you, soldier," he shouted. Mike heard him. Ace did too. The dog barked again, louder this time, a fierce, warning sound meant to travel far. But the air swallowed it. The sound fell dead only a few yards from the door, as if the world itself refused to carry warnings anymore. Mike slammed the curved door shut and dropped the thick wooden bar into place. The latch seated with a solid thud that vibrated through the wall. He turned and pressed his back against the door, breathing hard. Ace did not move away. He shoved his shoulder against the door as well. Injured leg tucked close, muscles locked. His eyes never left the narrow seam of light beneath the frame. The silence deepened. It was not peaceful. It was suffocating. No insects, no birds, no rustle of grass. Even the faint groan of distant machinery from town disappeared. The world seemed to hold itself rigid, stretched thin, waiting. Mike slid down until he was sitting on the packed earth floor, one hand buried in Ace's thick fur. His fingers found the familiar scar along the dog's shoulder, the reminder of a night overseas when Ace had dragged him clear of falling debris. The memory came unbidden. Heat, dust, the sound of a wall failing, the weight of men he could not pull free in time. Not now, Mike whispered, forcing himself back into the present. Ace let out a low whine, pressing his head against Mike's chest. The dog's heart raced, fast and powerful. He was afraid, but he was not retreating. Outside, the light dimmed further. The green hue thickened, stained deeper by yellow flashes that pulsed faintly within the clouds. They moved in slow, deliberate layers, stacking and compressing, as if guided by unseen hands. Mike rose and moved to the small opening he had cut into the wall, just wide enough to see without weakening the structure. Through it, he saw the town frozen in place. People still stood outside. Some laughed nervously, some shaded their eyes. No one ran. He remembered Laura Bennett's words, the lull, the quiet period before everything changes. The pressure hit next. It wrapped around the cabin like an invisible grip, squeezing hard enough to make Mike's ears ring, his vision blurred for a heartbeat. Ace yelped once, then braced harder, paws sliding slightly on the dirt as he adjusted his stance. "Hold on," Mike breathed, dropping to one knee beside him. The first sound was not wind. It was a hum, low and resonant, vibrating through the ground and into Mike's bones. It grew steadily, deepening into something alive, something immense. The cabin shuddered once, as if testing itself. The curved walls answered with a dull groan, not of breaking, but of flexing. Then the world outside exhaled. The roar came all at once, layered and violent, like a freight train tearing through the air while steel screamed in protest. The ground trembled. The door bucked against Ace's shoulder. Mike threw his weight forward, pressing himself against the dog, adding every ounce of strength he had left. The storm struck the cabin from the side first. The force slid along the rounded wall, diverted, scraping across the curve instead of slamming straight through. Mike felt the vibration ripple under his palms, the structure bending just enough to survive. Debris hit next. Boards, sheet metal, something heavy that struck and spun away with a grinding shriek. Dust rained from the ceiling. The fire pit Mike had dug earlier flared as embers lifted, then died as the pressure shifted again. Ace barked once, then clamped his jaw shut, teeth bared in effort as he pushed back against the door. His injured leg trembled violently, but he did not move. Mike's mind flashed back again, unbidden, sand. A sky turned wrong. The moment before an explosion when the world went quiet and his body knew before his thoughts did. He shook his head hard, forcing the memory down. "We are here," Mike said aloud, voice shaking but strong. "We are here." The storm changed direction. This time it hit harder, slamming directly into the north side. The cabin lurched. Mike felt the floor shift beneath him. For a terrifying second, he thought the structure might roll. But the weight settled. The curves did their work, bleeding off force, redirecting pressure. Ace let out a sharp cry as something struck the door again, harder than before. Mike wrapped his arm around the dog's chest, pulling him close, feeling the heat and strength beneath the fur. "Stay with me, buddy. Stay." The roar peaked, then fractured, sound breaking apart as pressure plummeted. Mike's ears popped painfully, his vision tunneled. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. Not slowly, not gently. Silence crashed down, heavy and absolute. Mike did not move. Ace did not either. They stayed pressed together, muscles locked, breath shallow, waiting for the world to decide if it was finished with them. Seconds passed, or minutes. Mike could not tell. Finally, Ace's breathing slowed. His body eased, just a fraction. The dog lifted his head and sniffed the air, cautiously. Mike swallowed hard and rested his forehead against Ace's. "We made it," he whispered, though he did not yet dare believe it. Outside, the silence remained, broken only by a distant creak of something settling. Mike reached for the bar across the door, hesitated, then tightened his grip. "Not yet," he murmured. Ace nudged his hand, eyes still fixed on the seam of light beneath the door. The storm had passed over them, but whatever it had done beyond the walls was still unknown. Mike leaned back against the curved wood, chest heaving, exhaustion washing over him in waves. For the first time since returning home, he allowed himself to feel it fully. The fear, the relief, the quiet certainty that listening, truly listening, had kept them alive. Outside, the town that had laughed stood changed forever. But inside the oval shelter, one man and one dog waited, breathing together, anchored by curved walls and loyalty that refused to break. The silence did not mean safety. Mike Carter learned that within seconds. The air inside the oval cabin grew tight, pressing inward as if the walls themselves were being tested by unseen hands. Ace stiffened beside the door, his breathing shallow and fast, eyes locked forward. Then the sound came back, not gradually, but in a violent surge. The tornado announced itself with a roar that swallowed every other sound. It was not wind as Mike had known it. It was a layered scream, metal and thunder and tearing earth fused into one. The ground beneath the cabin shuddered hard enough to rattle Mike's teeth. Ace slammed his full weight against the curved door. His injured leg screamed in protest, muscles quivering, but he did not shift even an inch. Mike saw the veins stand out beneath the dog's thick fur, saw the strain ripple through his shoulders and down his spine. Mike moved without thinking. He planted his boots wide, pressed his shoulder and back into the door beside Ace, and pushed. His lungs burned as he exhaled, forcing his body to become part of the structure. "Hold, buddy," Mike said, his voice nearly torn away by the noise. "Hold it." The first impact slammed into the south side of the cabin. The wall bowed inward slightly, then rolled the force away, the curve deflecting pressure instead of absorbing it head-on. Mike felt it travel through the frame like a wave, sliding rather than striking. Outside, something massive hit the structure and spun off with a shriek. Mike imagined boards, fences, maybe entire roofs torn free and hurled like weapons. He thought of the town, of the square houses with sharp edges and corners that gave the wind something to grab. The tornado circled. It struck again, harder this time, ramming the north wall with a force that drove Mike to one knee. Ace growled low in his chest, a sound of pure effort, not fear. The door bucked violently. The wooden bar creaked but held. Mike's ears popped painfully as the pressure dropped. His vision dimmed at the edges. For a split second, memory took him. A different sky, a different roar, the crushing weight of collapse overseas. He tasted dust and blood, heard shouts cut short. "No," Mike growled aloud, dragging himself back to now. "Not this time." He wrapped one arm around Ace's chest, feeling the dog's ribs heave against his forearm. Ace's heart hammered like a piston. The German shepherd shifted his stance minutely, adjusting his balance to the changing force, using instinct sharpened by years beside Mike in places where hesitation meant death. The tornado changed direction without warning. The cabin shook as if lifted, then dropped. Mike felt the structure roll a fraction of an inch, then settle. The oval shape refused to give the wind purchase. There were no corners to tear, no flat planes to pry apart. The storm screamed in frustration, its energy sliding along the curves, bleeding away into the ground. Something heavy crashed against the roof, scraping across it in a grinding howl before being flung clear. Dust and splinters rained down. Ace barked once, sharp and fierce, then braced again. Mike's muscles screamed. His old injuries flared, lightning bolts of pain across his knee and lower back. He welcomed it. Pain anchored him. Pain reminded him he was alive. Another blow, then another. Each one felt like a test, a demand. The cabin answered every time, bending just enough, holding firm. Outside, the world was being erased. Mike knew it without seeing it. He felt the violence in the way the ground trembled, in the way the air roared and twisted. He imagined Hank Miller's house, the square lines and heavy roof, the confidence built on decades of storms that had never quite reached them. He wondered if Hank was still laughing. The roar peaked. The pressure inside the cabin plunged so fast Mike gasped, his chest seizing. Ace yelped, a sharp sound of pain and effort, then dug in harder. His injured leg slipped, just for a second. Mike reacted instantly, shifting his weight, pushing Ace back into position, sharing the load. "I've got you," Mike said, his voice raw. "I've got you." The tornado howled as if enraged. Then, without ceremony, it moved on. The force lessened, the sound breaking apart into fragments. The cabin still shook, but the blows became glancing, then distant. The roar faded into a low, retreating thunder. Silence slammed down so suddenly it felt unreal. Mike stayed where he was, frozen, muscles locked, afraid that moving would invite the storm back. Ace remained pressed against the door, panting hard, sides heaving, eyes wide and alert. Seconds stretched, then minutes. Ace's breathing slowed first. The dog lifted his head slightly, sniffing the air. The smell was wrong. Wet earth, splintered wood, ozone, destruction, but no immediate threat. Mike rested his forehead against the door, chest burning. "We did it," he whispered, though his voice trembled. Ace let out a low whine and leaned back into him, a quiet acknowledgement. Mike eased the wooden bar free with shaking hands. He paused, listening. Nothing. No wind, no roar. Only a distant creak, the settling groan of a wounded landscape. He pulled the door open. Cold air rushed in, sharp and empty. The light outside was wrong, flat and gray, stripped of warmth. Mike stepped out slowly, Ace limping at his side but refusing to hang back. The sight stole Mike's breath. Where the town had been, there was chaos. Homes were gone. Not damaged, but erased. Foundations lay bare. Trees were stripped to splintered trunks, branches twisted and flung far from where they had grown. Pieces of roofs and walls lay scattered like debris from a demolished set. And in the middle of it all, the oval cabin stood. Its walls were scuffed and dusted with dirt, but intact. The roof remained seated. The curved door swung freely on its hinges. It looked almost defiant, a quiet answer to the violence that had failed to break it. Ace stopped and looked around, ears swiveling, nose working furiously, his body tensed again, not in fear, but in purpose. He took a few limping steps forward, then barked once, sharp and commanding. Mike followed his gaze. Something moved in the debris. A sound. Faint. Human. Mike's heart lurched. He grabbed a fallen board and sprinted toward the noise, Ace moving beside him despite the pain, leading the way. "Help!" a voice croaked, barely audible. Mike dropped to his knees and tore at broken siding, ignoring the pain in his hands. Ace circled, sniffing, then pawed insistently at a spot near a collapsed fence. Mike dug there, muscles screaming, until his hands closed around fabric. Hank Miller lay beneath the wreckage, face gray with dust, eyes wide with shock. Blood streaked his forehead. His arm was pinned awkwardly. Mike froze for half a heartbeat, then moved. He levered the debris aside and hauled Hank free, bracing his weight against the man's broad frame. Hank gasped, coughing hard, then stared at Mike as if seeing him for the first time. "You were right," Hank rasped. Mike shook his head. "Save your breath." Ace pressed close, sniffing Hank's face, then licking his cheek once, gentle and reassuring. Hank's tough expression cracked, fear and disbelief spilling through. "That dog," he whispered. He knew. Mike helped Hank sit up against what remained of a tree stump. He scanned the devastation, ears straining for more sounds. There would be others. Ace barked again, turning toward another pile of debris. His tail wagged once, sharp and purposeful. Mike squared his shoulders. The storm had taken everything it could, but it had not taken them. And as long as Ace stood beside him, listening when others laughed, Mike would keep digging, keep lifting, keep standing. Behind them, the oval cabin stood like a shield left planted in the earth, proof that sometimes survival belonged not to the strongest walls, but to the smartest shape, and to those who trusted the warning growl that came before the wind. Morning came slowly, as if the sun itself hesitated to look upon what the storm had done. A thin gray light spread across the Kansas plain, revealing a landscape stripped down to its bones. Where houses once stood, there were only slabs and scattered fragments. Fence lines twisted like wire pulled from the ground. Trees leaned at unnatural angles, bark torn away, branches gone. Mike Carter stepped out of the oval cabin with Ace at his side. The dog limped heavily now, exhaustion finally catching up with him, but his head remained high, eyes alert. He paused every few steps, listening, sniffing, searching. Ace found the first survivor before Mike heard anything. The German shepherd stopped abruptly near a collapsed shed, ears forward, tail stiff. He let out a sharp bark, then another, and began pawing at the debris with careful urgency. Mike rushed to him, dropping to his knees, ripping away broken boards and insulation with bare hands. A woman lay trapped beneath a fallen beam. She was in her 30s, slim, with dark hair matted with dust and sweat. Her skin was pale, eyes unfocused with shock. She gasped weakly as Mike freed her shoulder. "Easy," Mike said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "You're safe now." Ace pressed close, sniffing her face, then licking her cheek once. The woman's eyes filled with tears as she clutched Mike's sleeve. They carried her back to the oval cabin, which already sheltered several others. Sarah Whitman was there, her usually neat hair tangled, her calm face drawn but resolute. She moved quickly, distributing water, tearing fabric into makeshift bandages. Her hands shook, but her voice did not. "We're not leaving anyone out there," she said firmly. Mike nodded. Neither was Ace. They went back out together. Ace led Mike through the wreckage again and again, barking when he caught a scent, stopping when a sound reached his ears that Mike's could not yet register. They pulled a teenage boy from beneath an overturned trailer, his face scratched, eyes wide with terror. They found an elderly man pinned beneath a fallen wall, his breathing shallow but steady. Each time Ace stayed close, guiding, guarding, refusing to rest. Hank Miller was the last one Ace found before his strength finally faltered. The dog froze near what remained of Hank's porch. He sniffed the air, circled once, then began pawing insistently at a pile of collapsed timber. Mike hurried over, dread tightening his chest. Together they shifted the heavy beams until Hank was revealed beneath them, unconscious, face streaked with blood, chest barely moving. Mike hauled the debris aside and pulled Hank free, cradling the stocky man's shoulders. Hank coughed, sputtered, then sucked in a ragged breath. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then locking onto Mike's face. You were right," Hank whispered hoarsely. Mike shook his head. "Don't talk. Save your strength." Hank's hand shot out, gripping Mike's jacket with surprising force. Tears cut clean lines through the dust on his face. "I laughed at you. I called you crazy. I said you were scared of the wind." Ace leaned in and pressed his muzzle against Hank's chest, steady and warm. Hank's grip loosened slightly as he stared at the dog. "He knew," Hank murmured. "That dog knew." Mike carried Hank back to the cabin with Ace limping faithfully at his side. Inside, people shifted to make room. Blankets passed hand to hand, water shared without hesitation. The oval walls enclosed them all, holding warmth and quiet in a world that had lost both. That night, the cabin glowed softly from the fire pit at its center. 20 people huddled together, some crying quietly, others staring into space, still unable to understand how everything had changed so fast. Children clung to their parents. Neighbors who had barely exchanged words before now shared blankets and whispered reassurances. Hank sat against the curved wall, his arm bound. In a sling, his broad shoulders slumped. He stared at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. After a long silence, he pushed himself to his feet and faced Mike. "I was wrong," Hank said, his voice breaking. "I thought strength meant building the same way my father did. Same corners, same roofs. I thought you were broken because you didn't fit." He swallowed hard. "Turns out you were the only one paying attention." The room fell quiet. Mike looked at Ace, who lay near the door, head up despite his exhaustion, watching everyone with calm vigilance. Mike rested a hand on the dog's neck before answering. "I didn't build that house to prove anything," Mike said quietly. "I built it because I've seen what happens when you ignore warnings, when you trust habit more than instinct." Hank nodded slowly. I won't forget that again. Morning light crept through the doorway, pale and uncertain. When people finally stepped outside, the full scale of the destruction settled over them, like a weight. The storm had carved a brutal path through the town, leaving almost nothing untouched except the oval cabin standing stubbornly at the center of it all. In the days that followed, help arrived. Emergency crews, utility trucks, volunteers from neighboring towns, and with them came questions. Why did this house survive when everything else was gone? Mike answered them simply. Curves don't give the wind a place to grab. Corners do. Engineers listened. Builders listened. The people of the town listened. Hank was the first to approach Mike with a plan. His face was still bruised, his arm still stiff, but his voice carried resolve instead of mockery. We can't rebuild the way we were, he said. Not after this. We want to build like you did. Strong. Smarter. Mike hesitated, old instincts urging him to stand apart, to keep moving alone. But Ace nudged his leg, tail thumping weakly, eyes warm and certain. All right, Mike said at last. We do it together. Weeks passed, then months. Foundations took shape, not square, but curved. Walls rose that bent instead of resisted. Roofs were anchored with care instead of tradition. Mike worked alongside the others, his hands still rough, his body still aching, but his heart lighter than it had been in years. At the edge of the rebuilt street, someone erected a small sign near the original oval cabin. The wood was simple, the letters carved by hand. Where the wind slides past, people remain. Beside the words, a set of paw prints was pressed into the drying cement. Ace's paw, and next to it, Mike's name. On a quiet evening months later, Mike sat on the porch of the oval cabin, watching the wind move gently across the fields. It no longer howled or threatened. It flowed, harmless and soft. Ace lay beside him, older now in posture, but still alert, still guarding. For the first time since returning from the war, Mike felt something settle inside him that had nothing to do with survival. Belonging. He scratched Ace behind the ears, smiling faintly. We're home, buddy. Ace leaned into him, eyes closing at last. The watch finally over. The storm took houses, roads, and everything people once believed was permanent. But it revealed something stronger that had been there all along. A man who refused to ignore warnings, a dog who never stopped listening, and a community that learned, through loss, how to stand together again. Mike did not survive because he was luckier than others. He survived because he paid attention, because he chose humility over habit, wisdom over pride, and love over fear. And through Ace's loyalty, we are reminded that sometimes the quiet signs come before the loud disasters. We just have to be willing to listen. Maybe that is how miracles often work, not always as thunder from the sky, but as guidance placed gently in our path. A warning, a loyal companion, a moment to choose differently. Many believe that God does not always stop the storm, but He prepares the shelter, the strength, and the people we need to endure it. As you return to your own life, may this story remind you to listen more closely, care more deeply, and stand ready to help when others fall. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you. And if you believe stories like this matter, subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing them together. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your steps today and always.